For over 2 centuries, one question baffled historians, archaeologists, and linguists across Europe. Where do Albanians actually come from? Their language looks like nothing else on the continent. Their written history goes dark for 1,000 years. Then, science stepped in, and what researchers found in Albanian DNA was really unexpected. In this video, we're going to walk through the full story of Albanian origins. We'll look at the linguistic mystery that confused scholars for generations, the fierce debate between historians about who Albanians really descend from, and then we'll bring in the DNA, the actual ancient genetic data from a major study analyzing over 6,000 genomes. By the end of this video, you'll know about one of Europe's oldest and most resilient populations. So, stay with me until the end. Let's start with a number that surprises most people. There are roughly 8.5 million Albanians in the world, but only about 2.8 million of them actually live inside Albania. That means more Albanians live outside their homeland than inside it. In fact, Forbes ranked Albania third in the entire world for the size of its diaspora relative to its population. Only Guyana and Bosnia rank higher. You'll find Albanian communities across Italy, Greece, Turkey, Germany, Switzerland, the United States, Canada, and Australia. In Kosovo, which has its own complicated political story, over 90% of the population is ethnically Albanian. So when scientists started investigating Albanian origins, they weren't studying a small, isolated group. They were investigating one of Europe's most widespread and historically persistent peoples. The Balkans, the region where Albania sits, has been one of the most contested territories in European history. Empires rose and fell there. Populations were displaced, absorbed, and replaced. The Romans came. The Byzantines held on. The Slavs migrated in from the north. The Ottomans ruled for 5 centuries. Through all of it, Albanians survived as a distinct people with a distinct language. That alone is extraordinary, and understanding how they managed it, genetically and culturally, is what this video is really about. So let's go back to figure out why that survival was so remarkable. And it starts with the strangest language in Europe. Think about how most European languages are related. Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian all share a mother language, Latin. English and German are cousins. Polish and Russian are siblings. Even Greek and Hindi share an ancient common ancestor if you go back far enough. Now here's the thing about Albanian. It belongs to the same Indo-European language family as all of those. It sits entirely alone on its own branch of the family tree. Linguists call this a language isolate within a larger family. And for Albanian, this isn't just technically interesting. It's one of the deepest mysteries in all of European linguistics. Here's where it gets even stranger. About half of all Albanian vocabulary consists of borrowed words from Latin, Greek, Turkish, and Slavic languages. Every empire that passed through Albania left words behind. The oldest document written in Albanian dates to 1462, a single page, a baptismal formula scribbled in the margin of a Latin church record by a bishop named Pal Angeli. Albanian speakers were predominantly rural mountain communities, shepherds and clans who had no contact with the literate courts of Rome, Byzantium, or the Slavic kingdoms. The language lived in mouths, never on paper. And that absence of written records is exactly why historians argued so viciously about where Albanians came from. Without texts, you have to look elsewhere for evidence. For a long time, the best tool they had was mythology and guesswork. For most of the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars proposed 3 main theories about Albanian origins. Each had serious academic supporters. Each also had serious problems. Theory 1 is the Illyrian descendants. This is the most widely accepted theory today. The ancient Illyrians were a group of Indo-European tribes who dominated the Western Balkans from around 1200 BC. They were fierce warriors, skilled sailors on the Adriatic, and at their peak, they controlled a large stretch of territory from modern-day Slovenia down to northern Greece. Several Roman emperors were of Illyrian descent, most notably Diocletian, who built one of the most extraordinary palaces in the ancient world at what is now Split, Croatia, and Constantine the Great, who legalized Christianity across the empire. When Rome eventually absorbed Illyrian territories, the Illyrian language began to disappear from official records. By the 7th century, it had vanished from written history entirely. The theory is that it didn't die. It just became what we now call Albanian. Theory 2. The Thracian Migration. Some 20th century scholars argued that Albanians were not Illyrian at all, but rather descended from the Thracians, an ancient people who lived in what is now Bulgaria and parts of northern Greece. Under this theory, Albanians would have migrated westward into their current territory during the post-Roman period, around the 6th or 7th century. This would make them relative newcomers to the Western Balkans, arriving at roughly the same time as the Slavic migrations. This theory was always controversial, partly because it was politically charged. If Albanians weren't indigenous to their current territory, it weakened historical claims to regions like Kosovo. The debate was never purely academic. Theory 3. A mixed origin. A third group of scholars argued for a more nuanced position, that Albanians descended from a mix of ancient Balkan peoples, including both Illyrian and Thracian, along with later contributions from other groups. This felt intellectually honest, but was also frustratingly vague. Without hard evidence, it resolved nothing. The core problem with all three theories was the same. Without a written record in Albanian, and without preserved physical evidence clearly linking modern Albanians to ancient populations, every argument rested on linguistic guesswork and circumstantial historical evidence. In 2023, a major research paper was published analyzing the genetic history of the Western Balkans. Scientists sequenced and analyzed over 6,000 ancient West Eurasian genomes alongside 74 newly collected DNA samples from present-day ethnic Albanians. This was not a small study. 6,000 ancient genomes is one of the largest datasets ever assembled for a regional population genetics analysis. The research team included scientists from multiple universities and institutions across Europe and North America. What they found settled the debate in a way that 2 centuries of historical argument had failed to do. The first major finding was continuity. Albanians today carry a genetic signature that is directly traceable to the Late Bronze Age and Iron Age populations of the Western Balkans, the very period when the Illyrians dominated the region. This pattern of continuity is unique in the Balkans. The neighboring populations, Bulgarians, Serbians, Greeks, Macedonians, all show clear genetic breaks, moments where large-scale migration significantly altered the population's DNA profile. The Slavic migrations of the 6th and 7th centuries left unmistakable genetic footprints across the entire Balkan Peninsula. Albanians show those Slavic traces too, but they are layered on top of an older foundation that survived intact. The study found that present-day Albanians predominantly descend from inhabitants who were already living in the region as early as 800 to 900, well before the earliest written mention of Albanians in historical records, which dates to 1043. Zooming in on the actual genetic makeup, researchers identified 3 major layers of ancestry in modern Albanians. The first layer is the smallest, a minor Neolithic component of under 4%, tied to the very first agricultural communities that spread across Europe from Anatolia. The second layer is by far the dominant one, accounting for roughly 72 to 77% of Albanian ancestry. This component is associated with Bronze Age and Iron Age populations of the Balkans, the Illyrians and related groups. This is the core of Albanian genetic identity. The third layer, making up about 16 to 19%, reflects migrations from late antiquity and the early Middle Ages, Germanic and Slavic groups who moved through the region between the 4th and 9th centuries. Albanians absorbed some of this genetically, but it did not reshape them. When researchers looked specifically at the Y chromosome, the genetic lineage passed from father to son. The picture became even clearer. The most common haplogroup among Albanian men is called E-Phi13. It represents about 28% of all Albanian men, around 40% in Kosovo. This haplogroup is ancient in the Balkans, traceable to the Bronze Age, and in some analyses even earlier. Another major haplogroup, J2B-L283, appears in roughly 15% of Albanian men. When scientists examined Iron Age skeletons from Dalmatia and Slovenia, regions associated with Illyrian culture, they found this same marker in ancient bones. The haplogroup was there before history was being written. It's still there today. Remember the Thracian migration theory, the one that suggested Albanians weren't indigenous to the Western Balkans, but arrived in the 6th or 7th century from further east. There is no evidence in the Albanian genetic profile of a large-scale eastward migration origin in that period. The Bronze and Iron Age ancestry that dominates Albanian DNA was already there, continuously before those centuries. This matters beyond genetics. The question of indigenous presence in the Western Balkans, particularly in Kosovo, has been politically explosive for decades. The 1998 to 1999 Kosovo War and Kosovo's 2008 Declaration of Independence were both wrapped up in competing historical claims about who was there first. The DNA does not take political sides, but it does provide evidence that Albanians have a continuous presence in the Western Balkans, stretching back at least to the Iron Age, far predating the medieval Slavic arrivals. When the Slavic migrations transformed the Balkans in the 6th and 7th centuries, reshaping the genetics, languages, and cultures of nearly every population in the region, Albanians absorbed some of that change, but fundamentally survived it. Their language survived. Their core genetic lineage survived. In a region that became one of the most repeatedly conquered, divided territories in European history, that is extraordinary. Researchers have described the Albanian genetic profile as representing a form of continuity that is essentially unique among Balkan populations. Not untouched, they absorbed Gothic, Slavic, and other influences over time, but anchored by an ancient foundation that held. Perhaps the most striking living proof of Albanian cultural continuity can be found not in Albania, but in the hills of southern Italy. After the death of the Albanian national hero Skanderbeg in 1468 and the Ottoman conquest that followed, tens of thousands of Albanians fled across the Adriatic and settled in villages across Sicily, Calabria, and Basilicata. They believed it was temporary. 600 years later, those villages still exist. They are called the Arboreshe communities. The people there still speak a medieval form of Albanian, a dialect so old that a modern Albanian listener would hear something closer to Shakespeare. They still practice Byzantine Rite Christianity, still perform traditional dances. The great Italian intellectual Pier Paolo Pasolini called it an anthropological miracle. And having heard the story, you can understand why. Albanians are not newcomers to Europe. They are not a medieval migration. They are one of the most ancient continuous populations on the continent, carrying Bronze Age ancestry that their neighbors lost centuries ago, speaking a language that outlasted every empire that tried to replace it, and maintaining a cultural identity that survived displacement, occupation, and 5 centuries of Ottoman rule. The science has settled the old debate. Not perfectly, there are still questions about exactly which ancient Balkan groups contributed most, and the research continues. But the broad picture is clear. Albanians are who they always claim to be. People of the ancient Balkans, rooted in an unbroken human chain that stretches back at least 3,000 years. If you found this video valuable, here's what you can do. Hit the like button. It helps this channel reach people who love history and genetics. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this one. Share it with someone Albanian, or someone who thinks they already know European history. And in the comments, tell us whose origins should we investigate next. There are plenty of mysteries left. We'll We'll see you in the next one.